Welcome to She Said Homestead, the podcast that explores homesteading from a range of perspectives. We're Sage and Mickayla, two homesteaders, each with unique experiences, properties, and future goals for our homesteads. We're discussing various homesteading topics, sharing our personal experiences as women working full-time who are managing homesteads as well, and shining a light on the stories of other inspiring homesteaders.
Before we dive in, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. And if you enjoy our podcast, please consider leaving a review. It really helps us grow and share these homesteading stories with even more people.
Hey there guys, welcome back to the podcast. I'm Mickayla from Calico Cow Acres.
And I'm Sage from Terra Nova Acres, and we both have homesteads in Western North Carolina.
Today we're going to be talking about what slow living and the simple life mean to us. But before we get into that, why don't you tell me about your week?
This week, honestly, has been mostly just continuing to get something in the ground every day. So it's been a lot of gardening and then also, just the general yard and property maintenance builds up on top of that. So I've done a lot of gardening, I've done a lot of weed eating, and not much else, but I did confirm that there are some turkey tail mushrooms growing in my garden. I have small logs bordering all of my garden beds, and I texted my brother. I was like, is this a turkey tail? Is this a mushroom that I can eat? And he confirmed it. So I did pick a batch of those, and then there's some more baby ones forming. So it looks like I should get another batch here soon. But it's been a pretty, I don't know, not super crazy week. It's just a lot of the same thing going on. What about you?
Well, okay, so I was going to ask, I know you have the mushroom logs that you and Antonio inoculated at some point, right? To those?
That was a project that Antonio owned, and
Okay.
they never did anything.
Okay, I didn't know if they were the same
wax.
logs. Okay.
No, they were not the same logs. These are just American beech trees that I cut down in the process of building the garden fence and everything else, and it was never an intentional thing. It just happened. But yeah, when Antonio tried to inoculate some logs, he poured some really, really hot wax on to cap it, and I think nixed everything that was gonna live there. So yeah.
That's a bummer. Well, I mean, free unexpected ones, they're kind of cooler anyway, so that's exciting.
Exactly.
So what are you going to use those for if you harvest them?
They are more of a medicinal mushroom. You don't usually use them for flavor. So I have them drying right now. I will probably store them whole and then just grind them up to use them once I research how I should use them. But they're the knowledge that I have at this current moment is that they're a good, like, functional mushroom just to help general support, help me be a more
supported person,
whole focused human being in theory. That would be nice.
You're collecting mushrooms from your garden to support your simple life, right? That's how it works.
There you go.
Well, I'm glad that you had an uneventful week, because mine was one of the most eventful weeks.
Yours is not?
It was more eventful than I think I could get into in the next hour. So I'll just go with one portion of that. So last week we spent most of the week cleaning and just kind of getting ready because we had guests coming for the weekend, for Memorial Day weekend. And they just left this morning, so they were here over the last few days. And we had some crazy weather roll through Friday night, less than a couple hours after they got here. So everybody was in bed. They got here really late. I was up late editing, as I usually am. I think it was like 12:30 or 1 or something like that. And I heard this weird noise. And mind you, it is hardcore storming, a ridiculous amount of lightning outside. And I hear a noise that I don't usually hear when it's storming. And I'm like, what is that? So I get up and go to investigate. And obviously the cats are like, what is this noise? They're also confused and like worried. And so the window in our dining room, that the window pane that is currently or was held in with just packing tape, pretty much. Just a tiny little bit of the spray adhesive and glazing that was left on it were there, but it's mostly just packing tape. The top of that packing tape was still attached, so it was like hinged, and it was just flapping in the wind as the storm was raging outside. And so there's rain coming inside. This window is like smacking and flying all over the place. And so I panicked because the last time that we had an open window for an extended period of time, Moo escaped, and it cost us like literally over $5,000 in vet bills, like thousands of dollars in vet bills, and like months of vet trips and recovery time, and he almost died, and it was a bad time. So obviously I was nervous and panicked, and it's 1 a.m. I have guests here sleeping. Taylor's sleeping. I go wake Taylor up, and he's like, can you just tape it back on? Because he's asleep. So I'm like, okay. So I run and try to go find the duct tape in the laundry room. I grab the duct tape. I open the door back to the kitchen. And as soon as I open the door up, the window just flies out and it's gone. And so now there's just one pane of window that's completely open. And so I go wake Taylor up again. I'm like, we gotta get this closed. I need your help. Like, the cats are trying to investigate. This is not good. There's rain coming in the house. There's lightning happening out there. So we got a trash bag duct taped to the window, the hole where the window was. And then we put cardboard over it after that too, just to make sure that the cats aren't going to mess with it. And then we heard this really loud crash. And it sounded like, the best thing I could describe it as was like a balloon popping right next to your ear. That's how loud it was. But it was like throughout the entire house. And I was like, oh my God, did something just fall on the house? Or like, what just happened? So Taylor goes to like investigate whatever's happening. And right before that happened, I was looking at my weather app to see if I could check the radar. And the internet wasn't working, and it had just been working previously. And so I don't know what happened. But in the morning, I woke up, went to explore and figure out what the heck that noise was. Lightning had struck the tree that's like about 50 feet from our house in the tree line between our house and the kudzu field. And it was a pretty big tree, and that like snapped in half. So I think that's what that noise was. But also the guests woke up when that happened and came out, and they were like, it looked like something just exploded in our bedroom. Like it was like a bright flash. And I don't know how that possibly could have happened. I don't know what it was. I don't know what made the light. It wasn't the lightning necessarily. They said it was in the room. And so maybe it was my computer screen or something. But there was like a power surge, and it took out our internet. So like our internet basically exploded. Like you could pick up the router, and it sounded like a box of cereal. Like, no joke. Everything inside was just like crumbles. Our electricity was fine, and everything else was fine. It didn't really even look like it had stormed that much, other than the tree being broken half and one or two more limbs on the pecan tree in the garden were down. But like the greenhouse was fine, and it's open, so like the wind could go in there and blow it over, and like obviously the window fell out. But so yeah, that was the storm, the stressful weekend. We managed to get everything else kind of figured out. We were having some other electricity issues that were happening prior to that as well in just one of our rooms. And they were able to get that fixed this weekend. We were able to get the internet fixed again. And now we got the window pane back in. It surprisingly didn't break. I got it like scraped clean and actually washed. And now we have one clean window pane that I can see out of that doesn't covered in spray adhesive, and it's actually like attached fully, which is cool. So yeah, other than all of that, having guests here for an extended period of time staying with us kind of just drains my energy. I'm not a very social person, so I like spending time with family and friends and whatnot, but I definitely need my rest at the end of the day. And when people stay with us, I don't really get that. So I am socially exhausted today. emotionally, socially. There was a lot going on this weekend in general. So a lot of stuff. That was my weekend for the most part, other than drinking beer in Asheville with family members.
Did you say that the lightning struck right next to your house? Or did you? I can't remember.
Yeah.
Well, for one, I'm glad that the lightning didn't strike your house. That's a win. But I'm so sorry that you've had a stressful week. That, on top of it being spring and gardening season and everything else that I'm sure you're dealing with, probably doesn't help, I would imagine.
I guess we got our tomatoes planted this weekend. Well, most of them. So that's a plus, a bonus. But yeah, the rest of the weekend was not really super productive in terms of homestead things. It was just kind of cleaning to prepare for guests and then entertaining and storm things. All right, well, do you want to talk about the simple life now that we went through that chaos? Maybe we can reduce some anxiety in the people who are listening. now that we've talked about all
the complicated life, now let's talk about the simple life.
Yeah.
Slow living and, simple living are concepts that I was aware of before I started homesteading, but I think I didn't have really a good grasp on both what it looks like and what it doesn't look like until I really, immersed myself in this instead of closer to the suburbs, closer to the city, commuting every day, doing all that shenanigans. And honestly, I think my understanding is still evolving as I continue to sort of dig deeper into this sort of homesteading lifestyle.
So I know that these terms kind of get used interchangeably a lot on social media, especially. Do you think personally that you could use those terms, simple life, simple living, slow living, interchangeably?
I think they're very similar. I think they are adjacent, but I don't think that they're necessarily synonyms. To me, living simply is a little bit more about getting enjoyment from like those smaller things, whereas living slowly is more about, embracing the delayed gratification of things.
Okay, so I feel similar. I think the way I see it is the simple life or simple living kind of addresses, in my mind, the material aspect of things more. And then slow living, slow life, that term encompasses like the time aspect of things. Like, I think it addresses the things that aren't tangible, if that makes any sense. In my mind, it makes sense. So for everybody listening, we wanted to kind of give a definition that Google has, because it does define these things as separate things. It defines them a little bit differently depending on which one you Google. So for the simple life or simple living, when you Google that, Google will say it is a way of living that involves owning fewer things, using less technology, and spending less money. It can also mean living in the countryside, such as a small cabin.
I understand what they're getting at, but I don't feel like I'm spending less money. I also don't feel like I'm using less technology or fewer tools for things. I feel like I'm doing that more because I'm doing more things myself. So, like, I kind of get it, but I also kind of disagree.
It feels to me like it's leaning into like minimalism, like the meaning of like what minimalism is. And honestly, like homesteading is the exact opposite of minimalism. My whole basement is full of
maximalism.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
It's simple. Like the tools can be simple depending on what you want to get for them. Like you could get a hand crank apple or tomato masher thing. What are they called? Mill. Or you could go get the one that attaches to your KitchenAid. So it's still a tool. It could be a simple tool or it could be a not so simple tool. So yeah, I think it kind of leans into minimalism, that definition, which does not fit with homesteading whatsoever, in my opinion. I also don't have a small cabin. You
Yeah,
kind
my
of have a small
house is
cabin.
kind of cabin-esque. We got the wood paneling going on, you know. It's a
Yeah,
vibe.
yeah. It's like it's not really, the outside's not really cabin vibes. The inside does have some
No.
cabin vibes though.
Yeah.
You have a bear living in your house, so there's that.
A polar bear, yes. A polar bear named Athena, who is not a livestock guardian dog. She's just a
House
cuddly
puppy.
dog. Yes.
And then the definition that Google gives for slow living is a lifestyle movement that encourages people to live more balanced and meaningful lives by slowing down and appreciating the present moment. It's about doing things better rather than faster and focusing on what you value most in life. And I think I agree with that. That's honestly what I would try to use to define pretty much both of these, just in a little bit different ways.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that one more so. But I think my perception before I got into this was that slow living is low demand, which, at least how I'm living, is not low demand. But I do still feel like it is slow living. Am I better about being intentional about that sometimes more than others? Absolutely. Uh, so it's requires active participation, in my opinion.
I think that when you picture the simple life or the slow life or whatever, it's kind of got this like romanticized view of like, I don't know, of like historic life, I guess. Like in my mind, it's like those times and like the tools that people used decades, hundreds of years ago, whatever you want to say, like those things were simpler. Things did happen slower, and like to embrace simpler, slow living now, it's going to look different, and it's going to look different at any point in time. Like it's never going to look exactly the same because technology and what society expects from people any given point of time is constantly changing. For me, it's an ever changing thing, and it will always be an evolving a thing that evolves, like the definitions of these for me.
What does your personal definition of slow living look like?
For me, like I said, it's focused on the time aspect of things. And that looks like focusing on little moments, small moments, things that I do every day, and being present in those moments and like doing them in a way that I enjoy doing them. So I'm conscious of the fact that I have to do this thing every day, or maybe I don't have to, but I want to do this thing every day. It's something I'm intentional about, and I make sure that that routine for that specific thing is something that brings me joy or just comfort or whatever it may be. So like I'll use the example of making myself coffee. I have a routine of how I make coffee, and like Moo, my kitty, he loves when I make coffee in the morning because he always gets a little lick of cream and he gets excited about it. So it's this whole thing where I'm like, okay, I get in from my chores, I get the heavy cream out, I pour a little bit of sugar into my cup, then a little splash of coffee to melt the sugar, then I put the cream in. Like I have a way of doing it. I froth it, and then like I hold my coffee cup there for like a couple minutes before I take a sip and just enjoy like holding a hot cup of coffee and how good it smells. And like I try to really take the whole thing in and like experience it well. And I think that incorporating that consciousness into things like that is my definition of slow living.
I have a similar morning routine with my coffee. It's not as, set aside or protected or whatever word you want to use. But something that I have started doing is like no matter how behind I feel in what I have to get done versus the deadline, and no matter how stressed I feel in that moment, I'm like, I'm going to either sit down on the couch with my coffee and have that 5 minutes. It usually doesn't take me long to drink my coffee. Or I'm going to walk around specifically the front yard and just like look at the flowers, look at the things that I've planted for the sake of being pretty, because that's what's in my front yard. And that is becoming a non-negotiable for me to set me up well for the rest of the day, because I could rush through that 5 minutes and get things done faster. But ultimately, if I protect that moment of having my coffee, then I am much more honestly regulated to do what I need to do for the rest of the day.
Yeah, that's a huge part of it for me too. And it's not the only thing. Like coffee obviously is a very important part of our lives. But it's not the only thing. Like I will do it for things that I have to do and not necessarily things that are just for enjoyment too. So like in the morning where between coffee or between chores and coffee, I often will stand out in the garden and walk around and look at everything and just kind of take note of how everything's doing. If there's bugs that need to be picked off, squash bugs have been coming around, so I've been doing that lately and just making sure I'm checking all the plants. And as I do that, I'm taking photos of things so I can share them on social media, because I'm a content creator. Like that is part of my day, but it's also an intentional 10 minutes of time where I'm like getting to walk around and enjoy and take pictures of things that are calling to me that day, where I'm like, oh, this would look really pretty with the sun right now, and there's dew on these leaves, and it makes me focus on little things in the garden, not just all of the work that needs to be done, not the overall garden. I'm looking at little bits and pieces of it. And then on the flip side, at night, after I finish doing whatever project I'm doing, I also do that. And I've mentioned that here before, where the specific marigolds, I can't remember which color, I think they're like the Hawaii ones or something, the ones that like glow at night right after the sun sets and it's dusk, taking those moments to just like take that all in and experience it, at as sweaty as I am, as disgusting as I am, as sore as I am, and however much I want to go inside, I stand there for like 5-10 minutes whenever I'm done and just stare at it and sometimes I'll take pictures, sometimes I just look at it and enjoy it. And that's a huge deal for me. That's kind of slow living for me. But what about simple living? What is your definition?
Yeah, so it's not so much about simplifying and the fact of doing less necessarily, but it's more about the motivations, at least for me. It resonates in a way of respecting the quote unquote simpler values. And getting enjoyment from those smaller things, like getting to sit down and watch the sunset, and finding fulfillment in that moment instead of needing to, or preferring to find it in something that's going to cost a lot of money. Like, yes, it'd be fun to go to a concert, but ultimately, if I'm intentional about where I draw my fulfillment, I don't need all of this, extra crazy stimulus. Like, I can just be where I am and still be usually really, really happy about it.
I feel like the Google answer for this one was kind of it felt like AI trying to like pinpoint a certain feeling, if that makes any sense. Like it was very specific for this one. And for me, it's more broad. I see it as kind of breaking down life into a form where you're really evaluating what works best for you specifically and not really just going with the flow, where it's again being conscious, just like with the slow living, but in an overall aspect, thinking of like, okay, this is what society is and says, does that work for me? And like evaluating that, and if it doesn't work for you, making the changes to make something work for you, and like simplifying your life in that way, not just doing all of the things because social media tells you to or something. It's doing what you want to do for you because it's what you want. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
That's the way I see it. Kind of just not going with the flow.
So when it comes to living simply, when it comes to slow living, what were aspects of those lifestyles that drew you to homesteading?
This is a hard question because I don't necessarily think I was considering simple or slow living when I kind of stumbled into homesteading. It was more of a nostalgic, and I don't know how to explain it other than it just felt right. Like I just kind of fell into it and I'm like, oh, I know this. I'm a human. I'm supposed to be connected to nature. Like it drew me in that sense. And I'm literally saying that gives me goosebumps. I have a whole goosebumps on my whole entire body right now. Just saying that. Yeah, it really just pulled me in. But if I had to try and connect that to what like the simple life and simple living are, the fact that being in nature more makes me feel more grounded, and it makes me be able to appreciate those smaller moments more because it regulates my nervous system. I am someone who's often overwhelmed and anxious and stressed out just by my environment. And so putting myself into nature literally has a physical effect on like calming me down. And there's only two things that can really do that, and that's being in the forest or in the garden or whatever when the sun's not beating down on me, and taking like a hot bath or being in the ocean or something. Those are the only two things that have that insane, like really quick physical effect on me. And yeah, so I think that the regulation of that really helps me. So it kind of just drew me in without really thinking about it. Was there specific, like, were you considering slow living when you got into homesteading and gardening?
Maybe inadvertently, not specifically. I relate heavily to what you just talked about in terms of regulating your nervous system, emotional regulation. I found homesteading when I was at a point in my life when I was trying to figure out what do I like, if I can build my life to look like anything. If I had a magic wand and I could wave it, what would I build? And kind of subconsciously, it was a life that is lived heavily outdoors because I truly think that as human beings, we are meant to see predominantly green and blue. And I think something even that simple, I don't want to get too deep with it, but like I think something even that simple can draw you into sort of your innate or instinctual humanity. Because at the end of the day, like we are animals. We're not all that crazy or special or different. And at least up until that point, I had lived a life that was pretty separated from nature. I would go seek it out on the weekends, but that is vastly different, from uh, being outside being the rule, not the exception. So I was at a point in my life where I was trying to figure out how to regulate myself, how to live more in the moment, how to seek out things that I do enjoy instead of, you could call it fitting into the box that I was supposed to fit into, right? Always chasing a carrot because I can get so tunnel vision about things, and I enjoy working hard towards something. There's you got to set boundaries around that, right? Because you have to do things like live life in addition to that. But I felt like when I was not homesteading, I felt like when I was living maybe what's now considered more of a traditional life where you live in the city and you have a 9 to 5 job and you keep the house and that's like kind of all you do and you sit down and you I was watching, TV. Like that was my hobby and satisfaction outside of that. Anyway, I felt like I was always chasing a carrot. I felt like I was always getting tunnel vision, working towards something, and then never getting to the end of it, which then just means that you're always running, and you're never resting. And so I needed that sort of switch. And it wasn't until I started to make those changes that I was like, oh, simple living, simple life. Like, yes, maybe that is exactly, what I am reaching for.
It's funny that you say the chasing the carrot thing. It really does feel like that to me at that point in my life too, but with a blindfold on. Like I don't know where I'm going. It's like trying to figure out what is happening, why I'm doing what I'm doing, if I should be doing this, and if I don't want to be doing this, how do I get out of it?
Yeah.
There's a lot that we could dive into there, and we're not going to. But yeah, I was in a similar situation with that. And I know we've kind of mentioned it before on the podcast, but for me, it was kind of like taking steps backward. And I guess this could be part of that simple living definition that I had, where you're like deconstructing the societal norm to kind of figure out what you actually want to do in life. And for me, that was taking steps backward and being like, okay, maybe I don't actually want to be like in a corporate office 9 to 5 every day and working as an architect or whatever. Like, I don't care about that. Sure, I love design, but at the end of the day, it's not what fuels me. Like, it does fuel me, but it doesn't fulfill me, if that makes sense. Like I do enjoy it, and I'm good at what I do, but I don't enjoy it as much as being in nature, and it doesn't have as many benefits for me as being in nature, other than monetarily, I guess.
Right. Yeah, that's definitely a factor. And I think particularly in American culture, we are so guilty of making people feel like what they do to earn their living has to be almost their entire life, right? It's the first thing that people ask when they're trying to get to know you is, "Hey, what do you do?" Um, and there are so many answers that you could provide to what do you do, but the fact that we always fill in that blank with, career says a lot. Yeah, that was also a time in my life when I was and continue to learn to unsubscribe from that. And I still feel weird, right? There's this element of, oh no, are the people that I work with going to judge me? Or like, am I gonna lose out on opportunities because I don't make work my whole life?
It's like that Big Bird meme, like Big Bird sitting in an office, like a corporate office meeting, and you're like, "This is how I feel." Everybody else is just a normal human, and you're like, "Yeah, like, what is happening?" Okay, so I have a question for you in regards to this. Since
Okay.
we're talking about simple life and slow living, general definitions that we've kind of come to acquire for ourselves, do you think that you can live the simple life or a slow life if you are working a 9 to 5 job, or if that's your thing?
I think it can be done. I think that how we have chosen to structure our society, particularly in that way, makes it more challenging, for sure. But there are things that you can do within that. I myself chose a chaotic job because there is an element of me that used to be larger, admittedly, that does kind of thrive on chaos. And I mean, I homestead, so that still still is part of it. And so you can do things like, and again, not easy, but yes, it's possible if it's worth it to you. You can do things like, change your job. If you are doing something like consulting, which is what I do, that is going to be an inherently chaotic job because you're kind of at the whim of your client. But there are so many other jobs out there that are lower stress so that, you can still earn your paycheck, you can still do the things you need to do to participate in normal society, but then still have more physical and emotional capacity to dedicate to your life that exists outside of work.
Yeah, I think that's important to note because we're not, obviously this is a homesteading podcast, so we're talking about things in relation to homesteading, but we're not trying to say that our way of doing simple life or slow life is the only way to do it. I think that you can incorporate those concepts no matter what your thing in life is, no matter what your goals are. So I agree. It's different depending on what those things are.
And another huge thing that drew me to homesteading in the vein of all this is honestly food. Like food is such this like cool, nurturing, really loving thing to me. One of the biggest ways that my mom would love on like all of us in the family was to cook us food. And it's this labor of love, not only in cooking, but also you extend that to, raising your food too. And that is almost, I mean, it very much is an art form. I'm not fancy with anything, but to be in the kitchen and, particularly if it's raining, right? Because that's usually when I'm like, oh, well, I can't really do anything else. So I'm just going to take this time to cook and really enjoy it because there's cooking to, get something in your body so that you can keep going. And then there's cooking to enjoy it and savoring it and taking the time. That is one of the main motivators that I do what I do. Like it took me an hour and a half to move the sheep today across the pasture. And I came in and I was kind of like down on myself. I was like, gosh, everything always takes so much longer than I think it will. And like, how do I not know by now how long it's going to take me to move the sheep? And like, why am I spending an hour and a half of my very precious time to do this stuff? And then I'll get in the kitchen and I'll be able to make a meal, not entirely, but a decent amount from food that I have planted, that I've harvested, that I, in some cases, have preserved. And when I get the chance to make that a ritual, both cooking it and eating it, it is cool. Like there's no words to describe that, at least in my vocabulary. There's nothing that fully encapsulates what that feels like to me.
I don't have words to explain that, but I have other moments that explain it. Just like holding my coffee for a moment with my eyes closed. That's the same feeling. Standing in the garden in like the early morning or the late evening and it smells like honeysuckle and wild roses. That's the same feeling. It's indescribable, but it's so good. I know exactly what you're saying. I don't think food was a huge part of it for me at the beginning, but over time, my love for cooking and my love for gardening have kind of meshed, and everything has sort of started to make sense and like combine together into like one path now. And it's all kind of like, okay, pulling pieces of the puzzle together here. And it's all starting to make sense. My life makes sense now. Who I am is starting to make more sense. And that's really cool to see, like the bits and pieces to come together. And like, that's why when someone asks if I, like, why do I homestead or what got me into homesteading, there are so many different things at this point where I could look back and say, that was a starting point. That was a little piece of the puzzle, and like they all kind of tie together. Do you feel like homesteading and like embracing a simpler, slower life kind of ties you to like your past or like the history of your family at all? I know you mentioned your mom cooking for you and whatnot, so.
I don't really feel like it ties me to my, my past or what my parents did or what my grandparents did necessarily, but I do feel like it almost ties me to these very instinctual aspects of being human. You know, getting in there and planting a garden, and there's a lot that you learn just by doing. But once I got past that first year, I don't know, it's kind of truly crazy what you learn by just getting your hands in the dirt. And it does kind of feel like it's a little bit in your DNA to know how to do that to some extent. Am I doing it perfectly? Absolutely not. I will never do it perfectly. But I don't know. There's something there.
I think about this often when I'm out in the garden, and if Taylor or somebody asks me a question, like when we had guests this weekend, they were asking me, like, what do we do with this, or what are you growing there? And it boggles my mind that I know this much stuff about gardens and about the plants. Like, I can identify things, even plants in the woods or like on a property that I haven't planted myself. I'm like, oh yeah, that's this, and it grows like this, and these are some facts about it. And I'm like, how do I know all of this stuff? And it just feels like it feels so right to know that stuff. And that's stuff where that's a thing where I feel a connection to my past, as in not like my parents really, because neither of them really did gardening things, but like I know my great grandparents had gardens and canned. Not that I ever got to do that with them, but like my family has a lot of rich like meals and like traditions with around cooking that I was not necessarily involved in, but I grew up eating the food. And so I feel connected to that still in like a way where I'm like, okay, I could recreate that if I wanted to now and actually teach, my kids or whatever, my grandkids in the future, these things, and that would create this connection. And the instinct, like the human instinct would be there, but also the ancestral like connection. And I think that's really cool. That's a huge part of it for me.
I want to talk a little bit about the misconceptions that both of us had about both what it looks like to live simply and live slowly before we really got into this homesteading thing.
For me, I kind of think everything that we do on our homestead takes longer than I expected it would. And I guess I would say that for most things in life. I'm just I think of the idea and I'm immediately like, okay, let's do it. Let's do it right now and get it done so we can accomplish that. And then Taylor does things the right way and they take longer. No, it's not just him though. In all seriousness, things do take longer because either there's weather happening or we have guests here or there's too many things on my to-do list, or the process itself is just a long process because things take a long time when you're doing every little step yourself. So that's something that I don't think that I was really fully prepared for, was how long things take. And that's regarding like preserving food takes a long time, especially if you don't have large blocks of time to do things in. So preserving, for an example, I will often take 3 or 4 days to preserve things because I'll make the recipe and I'll get everything in jars, and then I don't have time. It's like bedtime and I have to work the next morning or something. I don't have time to sit there and let it can all night because you have to watch the canner. So I have to put things in the fridge and then pull them out, let them come back to room temperature or get a little bit closer to room temperature, start the canner with cold water in it, let it all heat up together, and that takes significantly longer. And I have to do that with every batch that I do. So it often takes a lot longer because of that, and that's because of time constraints. And that's because I have a 9-to-5 job or something. Like, whereas if I was just doing the homesteading thing or working on my own time, I could probably work around that a little bit better. So there are other factors at play there. But yeah, things take a long time.
I also had a misconception about how long these things take, especially for me when it comes to gardening. I I did it last year and I definitely did it this year. This year I was like, I don't need to re-broad fork. My soil is better. I'm gonna do way less bed prep. And so I'm gonna knock out, planting the garden, even if I do it in little spurts at a time, not all at once. I'm gonna knock it out in a couple weeks. And especially with the earlier frost dates, I was like, I'm golden. I'm not. I still have 4 racks worth of plants to put out, which is 4 times 4, 16. 16, 10, 20 trays worth of plants to go in the ground. And it's at this point a few days before June. So, yeah, I think I just always need to count on it taking a month for me to get the garden just planted, nothing else, right? Like not mulching, not weeding, just planted.
That kind of goes into something that I was thinking about earlier, and that's the fact that the overarching title of homesteading has pushed me into a lot more smaller hobbies than I realized. And I think for you, that's like adding a bunch of flowers this year, right?
Yeah,
Like,
I added 2 new garden spaces, all flowers and all in my front yard. So I did like double my gardening space to be fair.
yeah. Yeah, so it's again, that's like an another factor that plays into it where it's not like you're not improving things and not improving your processes. You're just taking on more. Um which, you know, that's just part of this. That's part of homesteading. And that's how I feel with, we're doing like our cider making, and we're making mead and doing the orchard, and there's other things branching off all of that stuff that I definitely didn't factor in when I first started getting into gardening and then stumbled into homesteading.
Looking at the homestead lifestyle from the outside before I got into it, I thought that there was going to be a lot more time to just relax, but I have learned that there is only time to relax if you make time to relax. I don't know, just the way that it's portrayed, which plays into the romanticized element of it all, which we've talked about before. We dedicated a whole episode to that specifically. But the way that it's portrayed is that you get to walk through the yard with the chickens and the garden, and like you have all the things in place and you just get to enjoy it, but not in that moment seeing everything that went into it. And being in it, I realized that you have to make that happen. That doesn't just fall in your lap.
Okay, two things about that though. For you specifically, I think that there can be a lot more rest I say automatically, but built in and factored in when you have more people working towards the same goal and you're doing things by yourself. So it makes sense that, you have to like really guard that time and make sure that you get your rest because you're doing everything on your own. But also I think it factors into, or I think personality and just who you are as a person factors into that, because I'm the same way where it's like I get a goal in my mind and I just want so badly to accomplish it and I get excited about it, and it's not like I don't get tired or exhausted, but I get so much energy by the thought of being able to accomplish that thing and like the process of it that I'll just keep going for it, and I don't take the rest unless somebody else makes me or some external factor makes me pause and stop and take the rest. So that's not something I'm very good at either, but
Yeah, my personality plays into that 100%. There are a lot of things that I, if not everything, I do to myself I'm not trying to make anyone throw a pity party for me, but I know I'm not the only one who works that way. So if my perspective helps you, great.
We've had people comment on our videos and say that, specifically like the 6-month video, and I think it's because of how it's paced, which makes sense. I get it. We've had people say that like this is anxiety inducing and like we're doing this the wrong way. We're doing it wrong because it's supposed to be the slow life. It's supposed to be the simple life. And it's chaotic and there's a lot. We have too much going on. We're taking on too much, blah, 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 blah. My question for that is when else would we do it where it would be less stressful and less going on and easier and less chaotic? Because we both work 9 to 5 and we're always going to probably work 9 to 5. And I feel like it seems like the older you get, the more obligations and responsibilities you have. So why wouldn't I just like immerse myself into this now if this is what I really want and spend my whole life working towards it and enjoying every little bit of it instead of wishing I was doing this for the next 10, 15, 20 years and then finally taking the leap once I have a whole bunch else to factor in. Yes, it is chaotic. Yes, there is a lot going on. No, it's not necessarily simple or slow. The process is a lot, but like I said, I have those little moments throughout each day where I like thoroughly enjoy them and I make sure that they're something that I am really taking in and experiencing. And I've set my life up to do that in a very purposeful way with the farm, with my job, with how I work from home and everything. I've set my life up so that I can live like that. And I think that's something that not everybody is going to understand.
Neither one of us was in a place to buy a property that was, maybe set up for that already, right? Like there are properties out there that have a barn, that have the farmhouse that doesn't need renovations, that have the chicken coop, that have the garden space set up, that have the pastures dedicated. Like that exists. But that is financially out of our reach. And so for us, it was, well, we can maybe squeeze into a piece of land that is, we'll call it less than optimal, not homestead turnkey, and put our blood, sweat, and tears into it, or we cannot do it at all.
Yeah.
Those are our options because we're constrained by finances.
Yeah, and I mean, we also could have spent 10 years, the next 10, 15 years, working towards paying off student loans and debt and whatever, and saving up enough to buy a property outright, even if it isn't the nicest property. But then we're still going to be having to put a bunch of time and effort and money into it, and we're going to be older. So our bodies won't be able to take as much at that point. And like that's another option. That's a valid option if that's what you want to do. But this path was the right path for me and Taylor and Sage.
And also, the picture of what homesteading looks like at year 5, at year 10, at year whatever down the road looks so different than year 1, 2, 3. Even if you buy, a property that is more or less ready to go, you're probably still going to want to make some changes to it. You're probably not going to have identical preferences to whoever was there before. You're going to be changing things. And building a homestead is fundamentally different than maintaining a homestead. So for me, since I've gone into this, it has always been from this perspective of the first few years are an investment. The first few years are the, buy-in to the delayed gratification. I am pushing myself like this so that I don't have to push myself like this later.
I feel like that leads into the last thing we kind of wanted to talk about, and that is, what does life look like for us 10 years from now?
When I think about my life 10 years from now, for one, I'm going to be 40. Oh my God, that's stressful. But aside from that, maybe I'll still be on the same property, maybe I won't. Maybe I'll still be doing it by myself, maybe I won't. I have absolutely no idea. But kind of operating under the assumption that I'll still be here, and that things will at least look relatively similar. I think that my garden soil would be in a really, really good place because I have committed to those labor intensive methods like broad forking, like hauling compost up the hill using a wheelbarrow, not using machinery that's going to compact the pasture, that kind of stuff. Those absolute labors of love to do it the long way around. 10 years of moving chickens, rotating chickens across the pasture, letting them add their manure, all the input from the feed that I bring in that goes straight onto the pasture, and the grass gets used as fertilizer. 10 years of some sort of ruminant rotationally grazing that grass and really building up some cool and healthy grass root structures that keep nutrients on my property, that are helping to store organic matter, that are helping to store carbon, all of those different things coming together and not only making what I already have, more productive, because you can get more out of a garden space if it's a happy, healthy garden space, and you can get more cream out of a pasture if it's the stuff that the sheep really like, if it's lush grass. So having these systems kind of down pat, because to this point, there's always more to learn than I could possibly cram in my brain, because at least a handful of things that I touch every day are new to me in that year. Like bees are new to me this year. Having ram lambs is new to me this year. Having to dig a trench through the garden because my plants are drowning is new to me this year. But you look at how the physical effort has compounded, you look at how the knowledge has compounded, and yeah, 10 years from now, the amount of food that I'm going to be able to pull out of here with kind of minimal effort, is really the hope, is mind-boggling.
Just think about how many new things you could bring onto your property, new hobbies and projects in the next 10
No.
years.
I cannot think about that because that is overwhelming. Nope, I'm not letting myself go there.
Oh, that's a lot. Do you think that at 40 years old you'll still be hauling wheelbarrows full of horse poop and manure?
No, I do that when I'm 30, so I don't have to do that when I'm 40. That's the point.
Yes, that's true. I love the thought of like having our orchard producing and bringing in more fruit than we know what to do with, and we have to like give it away, and having a pond down at the base of the property, so it all like the water on our property really actually makes sense at that point. I see more raised beds because I'll be older. I see that happening, and really like figuring out dairy, like the dairy on the property. That will be really interesting once we get into that. What else? I like the idea that family members of mine, or family members in general, friends or whatever, would move near us. I think that's something that I really am hopeful for that to happen in the future. I don't know if it ever will, but I really love the idea of that and being able to like participate in homesteading things with them, because I think that, especially my friends, but if we did have family, I think they would probably participate too in you know, if I ever did want to do like meat chickens or something, I would have somebody to do it with on our property at that point, because obviously Taylor is not participating in that. That's something that I kind of don't really get to participate in on our property because of that, which I don't need anything else to do at this point, so that's fine. Like I don't need another thing to do, so it's okay. Like it doesn't bum me out that much. But I do think that, you know, if we had friends or family that live nearby that would be willing to assist with butchering a pig or something, we could really improve our property more that way if they were to help out with that. And like building a community and like actually having people that I know here more. You know, I've built some friendships here, but I think to see like what the community aspect of that is in 10 years is going to be really cool. And at that point, I hope to have like a child or two by then. So I feel like that will also kind of incorporate into the community aspect of things. But I don't know. We'll just see how that plays out. And hopefully our house has floors. That's what I'll end that with.
You have floors, it's just subfloor. So it's like counts like half credit.
Yeah, subfloors. The lower layer of our subfloor. So with all the input that we're doing now, all the work that we're doing now, everything we're putting into it, I really see that paying off, not only in what we're bringing in food-wise, but I think that the streamlining of things and the effort is going to allow us more time to explore and experiment with things and try things out. But I think it will be at a less necessary pace and more just like as we see fit and for fun. And I think that leads to more of the slow moments, the simple moments, and simplifying things and being able to really like savor, be present in community interactions, friends interactions with our animals, and then just those daily little moments that we've already talked about even further.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of She Said Homestead. We hope you enjoyed our chat. Before we say goodbye, we'd love to hear from you. Send your homesteading stories to us at shesaidhomestead@gmail.com. We can't wait to share them on the air. To stay connected, follow us on Instagram for updates and sneak peeks at what's coming up next.
If you like video podcasts, make sure you subscribe to the She Said Homestead YouTube channel too. We can't thank you enough for being part of the She Said Homestead community. Until next time, happy homesteading.